Lucrezia, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming on. I know you were a little bit reticent when I first reached out and suggested you come on, and I get it. For those of you, for those out there who don't know who you are and what you're about and kind of what your story is, could you give us like at least the elevator pitch, the short version of sort of what you're about and why we're talking today?
I am a survivor of, I suppose you could call it mostly childhood covert abuse, but there was physical and other horrible types of abuse too, as well as some relationship abuse and things like that. And I mostly go around now just making people aware of perhaps what they are going through if I see them posting something that makes me think they're going through the same thing.
Hmm.
I remember how confusing it is. I don't want to have other people in that situation without somebody reaching out and saying, hey, why don't you watch this podcast? Why don't you read this article? I think you might be going through something. So that's kind of my mission is I just like to try to help people to prevent them from being stuck in the same kind of situation.
Yeah, and I think that we really aligned around. I think that's why we started chatting originally, right? Because I think we
I think
both
so.
sort of we got the bat signal that each of us had some rough childhood stuff and partner abuse and a couple other things that I think we all know, right? You can't go back and fix a broken child. But I
Yeah,
think that there are things that you can do to try to make it better, even if it's being there for somebody and talking about your experiences and helping people get better. I think that's an important conversation to be had in public, although it's one that people don't like to have. It's not a comfortable conversation to have.
I agree. I think it makes people not only just uncomfortable, but when they have to bring up things that were painful to them, and if they experienced it when they're a teenager or a small child, they feel embarrassed, like it's their fault.
Mm.
And it's never their fault, but they still have that feeling inside, that wound inside that makes them feel like I had something to do with this.
Yeah, and I really that really touched a nerve for me because that was probably the primary feeling I had growing up. Because I came from a very abusive household, and I went to like a really religious Catholic school, and it was all like these perfect families, like preppy kids with the attorneys for dads, and everyone looked like they had all their shit together. And I knew that I had this terribly messed up family, and even though I was the one being abused, I felt shame. Right? Like I was so ashamed of just being, in that type of family system.
Yeah, you just figure out at an early age that, oh, this is not normal. I can tell this is not healthy. And you can't possibly place it. You may be trying to figure out what about this isn't normal? Why is my family so different? Why is the way I'm being treated so strange? I know it doesn't feel good. I know it's not right, but when you're a child, you can't verbalize. You can't verbalize what the horrible thing is that's happening to you. It usually takes a lot of reflection and introspection in your adult life, and then you finally realize, oh wow, this actually happened to me in my childhood.
Yeah, so I had questions for you because I looked in your profile and I've always wondered because it says you have amnesia from before 2018. And I want to ask you a little bit more about to clarify that. Like, what do you mean when you say that? I think I have a good idea, but I want to make sure I'm tracking.
I first actually thought I had some kind of brain damage. When this first happened to me, I was actually covertly abused into a nervous breakdown in 2016, and I could randomly not remember almost anything about my life. And I was like thinking, must have brain damage. I still knew my name. I still kind of knew who I was related to, even though I couldn't tell you anything about the people. Some of the negative stuff did come back over time. But I still, if you ask me stuff about my childhood, I'm only just now starting to recover memories. And this has been since 2016. From before 2018, everything is like a vague blur where I can't remember things. I can kind of remember who I'm related to, kind of remember who my friends are, kind of remember relationships that I had, but it's just there's not really a visual component to my memories anymore. There's very few of those. And the messed up thing is I can remember before, remembering better. So I can remember what a visual memory looks like. I just no longer really have them. I am starting to recover some now, but it's been over 8 years. So it took a long time for me to start recover at all.
Wow. And so was there something specific that happened that caused that? The reason I'm asking, I'm a nerd, I'm a brain nerd, and, you know, when trying to figure out what happened to me and how it's impacted my brain, like, I've gone into the neuroscience, and the hippocampus is one of those things that gets damaged, quite frequently. You can see it on brain scans in kids who are abused, and that's the part of your brain that transfers experiential data into long-term storage, right? So there are, a lot of childhood abuse survivors that have difficulty with memory or patches where it's just complete, you know, and I have that too. Like my biography is just it's just chunked up. There's pieces, just bits and pieces that I remember, but a lot of it is just gone. It's not there.
What I was told about it is that any form of it, even if you're just missing chunks or slices or even just tiny slivers, I've been told any version of it is just called dissociative amnesia. Usually
Hmm.
it takes place around the abuse. Mine was kind of abnormal because I forgot almost everything. Granted, I did have a very crappy childhood, but it ended up where a lot of things were forgotten. As far as I know, it doesn't, it's not specific to one type of abuse or another. You could even have a family that's loving, but if your parents are alcoholics or really addicted to drugs, from seeing your parents go through that, you'll block that out as well. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a form of abuse, but it takes, your brain tries to protect you, takes all of these chunks and wraps them up in foil or gauze or something. It's like, you don't need to know this right now. I need to keep you safe. So it just takes them all away and hides them. And it's not really doing anything wrong at the time. You know, it's doing its job, which is to protect us and make us be
Right.
okay. But in the long run, we kind of need these memories to process the things that have happened to us. So it does kind of hinder us in the long run, but I understand why our minds can do that.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I completely get that. But also, it's important to keep in mind from a biological perspective, our bodies only care about, or we're just basically gene reproduction machines, right? Like it's going to protect you, so hopefully you can live long enough to where you can you know, reproduce, and then your genes pass on, and then your genes have done this job, right? Like your biology isn't necessarily there to make you healthy and to make you happy and make you a fulfilled human being. All it cares about is making copies. And one of the interesting things that I've learned about abuse is that there is actually, you familiar with R versus K sexual selection?
No.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Every human being is encoded, and actually, it's in most mammals too, is encoded with two different types of sexual reproduction strategies. One is R and one is K. They just assigned it that, right? And so it's an epigenetic factor, right? So you can actually have it turned on by your environment. And what it's doing essentially is, if you are in a safe, stable environment, you will be programmed to have few offspring and to have high parental investment. So you like have two kids, maybe three kids, and put a ton of investment. You take care of them really well. Um, but if you are in a really dangerous environment, this sort of epigenetic switch kicks on, and just like make copies as quickly as you can. And then we always joke, it's like the R is for rabbit, right? Just crank out a bunch of you know, offspring and hope some of them survive, right? That's why you often see that trope of the, you know, the abused girl who becomes a stripper or escort or something like that, gets into sex work, or becomes promiscuous, or something like that. That is part of that sexual selection thing, and it's weird because it's like a switch that gets turned on in people. And so there's real consequences to that. But I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, other than the rant about your genes just don't care about you. Like we are vehicles for the genes. We're here to make copies, and they don't care about our health and happiness. They want to protect you enough that you can reproduce, but not that you can be like a fully, you know, mentally healthy human being.
Yeah, I guess it really just comes down to that in the end, where it's like, yeah, you probably need to have a few kids. Go on, have go, you know, have them. I can't do anything else to help you.
Yeah, yeah. So, and that's the tough part, right? Because, you know, being a human being is like, we actually would like to be, you know, happy and healthy as much as possible. And if you've got this history, it's a slog, man. It is really difficult to correct once you've broken a kid.
I completely missed part of that because your feed was kind of jumping back and forth and cutting out your audio a little bit.
Oh, geez. Yeah, for everybody who isn't aware, I'm sitting in the UK right now, and I even called it earlier today when I posted. I was like, "Yeah, I hope the UK internet doesn't screw me up." But no, I was just saying, like, it makes it difficult to do self work, right? Like, to heal yourself, to work with therapists and try to, you know, get past some of this stuff. You know, because, like you said, if your hippocampus is shutting things off and you're missing memories, how do you go back and deal with the damage? Because it's in there, right? Whether you know where if you're cognizant of all these things that happen to you or not, they still happen in your body. They always say the body keeps a score. Like it's in there somewhere. And so, have you done a bunch of therapy?
I have not, actually. I came out of this mostly by myself because I didn't trust
Mm.
therapists. I have a hard time trusting them.
Oh,
I have
interesting.
one that I talk to now, but that's only been for about a year. He's really nice, so I'm glad that I did do that. We disagree on a lot of things, including he goes by what's in the actual DSM, and as you know, stuff
Oh,
like narcissistic abuse syndrome and
right.
covert abuse syndrome and CPTSD and things are not in there. When to me, it's plainly obvious. A lot of people have these. A lot of people have had parents or teachers or somebody that's had obvious NPD and impacted them in a horribly negative way, and they have all these symptoms. So we don't agree on everything, but he's just a good person to talk to, but to also have some disagreement with.
Yeah,
Um,
no, I think that's fine, right? Like, the it's weird too because you get into any profession like that, they got professional standards that they have to follow, and they get locked into a box. And so I think a good therapist, by the way, I am skeptical of therapists, but I have found good ones. I've got two that I've dealt with that are absolutely fantastic, and a bunch that were just terrible. I think it's important for people, if they're trying to get this stuff sorted out, to not bail when they encounter their first bad therapist, because
yeah,
there's a bunch of them out there. But also, I think you're to your point, like you have to have some responsibility in the recovery as well, right? You should be reading what's out there. You should be trying to understand all of the literature around abuse and ways to get better. I think it's important for people to do that, aside from just going to a professional and saying, hey, fix me, like that's I think that could actually be detrimental sometimes, especially if you listen to the wrong person.
it really could be. I agree with you. And my parents actually used to teach us, or I guess teach us by some form of abuse, that psychologists and psychiatrists and things like that was a punishment. And I mean, if you want to know just how ridiculous some of this got, if you've ever seen those TLC and Discovery Channel reality shows where they over dramatize the reaction to everything going on with the people,
Yeah.
it was like that with mental health. It's like, oh my God, we got to drive them there immediately. It's a 911 emergency. And it's like a normal teenager just dealing with abusive parents. So it wasn't really, it was just so much overreaction, so big, almost grandiose, but grandiose in a way where they're trying to present it as caring. I think that sets people up for not trusting medical professionals in their future. I think that's what it did to me. It made me like, no, I'm not going to trust any of these people who just want to give me a bunch of pills and misdiagnose me multiple times.
Right, right. Yeah, that's rough. So going back, because I don't think we really went too deep, and please tell me if I'm going, somewhere I shouldn't here. But what do you know about what happened to you? I know you got chunks missing here, but I think you've referenced in the past some person with narcissistic, either personality disorder, or at least narcissistic traits. Um, and you talked about covert abuse. Maybe you could talk about what you do know that happened to you.
I believe that my mother probably has NPD, or if she doesn't have it, she has very high traits, maybe even a covert borderline is possible, but just
Mhm.
more on the NPD scale. I had no idea until about 4 or 5 years ago, actually. I just thought my childhood was normal. I thought I was just poor with a mom who had bipolar disorder. I no longer think that now because I can remember a few things here and there, and I know I made notes, but I think actually talking about it has scattered my mind slightly. Just weird little things that I can remember. I'll give you one example of a memory. I remember being 12 and really liking this dress that one of my my stepmother, gave me. I'm 12. I don't understand that I'm getting taller and that the dress is too short. I'm 12.
Right.
I don't understand this. Instead of explaining that to me, I remember my mom looking at me, giving me that death glare that narcissistic parents often give you, and telling me, oh, you just want to look like a little slut. I'm 12 years old, and my mom is saying,
Jeez.
so while I'm missing several chunks, I can still tell you weird things like that happened. My stepdad, as far as I know, never did anything to me. He's just kind of more passive, but he was definitely one of those people where he just kept his porn where everybody can see it, which is not normal. I have a huge problem with stuff like that just in general, but I think that did not help. I think that made it to where I am so intolerant of that. That is just a big no for me.
Right.
Um, I just get so mad if I see people putting that in front of kids at this point because of that. One or two different boyfriends were allowed to move in with me when I was a child under 18, including one who was a 21-year-old man who had he was a minor when he molested his sister, but he was like 16 and she was like 6. So keep in mind, my
Oh my
parents knew
god.
this. Let this guy move in and live with us for about a year. I wasn't allowed to break up with him because my mom liked to go clubbing with him. So I was 14. So instead of
What?
letting me have this guy cheating on me and stuff out of my life, my parents are like, no, they're trying to talk me into it, like trying to pretend to be concerned and kind. Like, oh, no, 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 you don't want to react that way. You don't want to do this. I should have never been allowed to have adults living with me. Um, I should not have had my parents providing cigarettes and alcohol to me, but that was something they did as well. And I didn't know any of that kind of stuff was abnormal. I believe my brother, one of my brothers, I have several, he also, I think he's completely no contact with my family. I still maintain some level of very low contact. He was like the scapegoat kid. He had a lot more mental issues with just reacting bad to stuff. I don't really believe he had any of the things that they were trying to say he had now, but he was the scapegoat kid. So it would be turning children against each other was a big thing for them. If I wanted to have a friend over, they would often blame him. And I'm surprised I even wanted friends to come over, to be honest with you. They would say, no, he's not in the mood for it. You can't have people over because your brother has mental illness. And it's like, that would make me and my other brother mad at him and lash out at him. And I think it was by design. I think they intentionally wanted him to be the super crazy one so they could be like heroes taking care of him or something. I'm not saying that he doesn't have his own issues. We all do, but I don't think they were anything like they were being presented when we were children.
Got it. Got it. So it's almost adjacent to like Munchausen, kind of like you want the kid to be messed up, right?
Yeah, I think it was something like that. In fact, I think that's what all of the trying to get all of your children diagnosed with severe mental illness, I think that was a version of factitious or Munchausen's. I really do, because she intended to, and I feel bad saying this about my mom because I really think she is trying to get a little bit better now, but I feel like she was trying to get us all so crazy that we're put on SSI because every one of us either has had no job or was put on SSI initially. So
Wow.
yeah, which as an adult who's aware of what happened to me now, I understand that if you have 3 children that you raise, it is statistically very unlikely that all 3 of those children are so mentally ill that they end up on SSI.
Yeah, right.
And that's kind of what ended up happening. I think one of my brothers got off of it, and I believe one of them just does construction stuff now, but he does it for cash only or something. I don't really talk to most of them.
Oh man. So what happened when you got out of the house? Because I think you've had some struggles with relationship stuff, maybe some trauma stuff that came out of prior relationships after you left, right?
Actually, it was mostly people who were allowed to move in with me. I did have some trouble after. I don't want to get into too much details there, and I'll tell you why ahead of time. I don't want to get into details that are beyond vague. I can still vaguely tell you the story, but
Mhm.
it's because one of the people who used to be really abusive to me actually changed their ways, and they're one of my biggest supporters now. I
Okay.
don't believe Whew, I'm sorry. I don't believe in dragging people through the mud who have legitimately, genuinely changed and become really decent people who are helpful and advocate for people who've been in a situation, despite that, yes, in their past they did not do some great things.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
yeah,
the way,
I agree too, by the way. Like, I think that that is the bright line for me, is if you have done some horrible things to people, I mean, we all know the hurt people thing,
oh
right?
yeah,
Like that's a thing. And some people break that cycle, and sometimes it takes some messing up before they do. And if you were like, hey, I totally understand. I screwed up. You apologize. You ask the person, what could I do, to make this right with you, and you make amends and do all these things, and like, great. That's awesome. That's not usually what happens, but if somebody does that, like, I would consider keeping that person in my life for sure.
yeah, I think it's people don't hear enough of those success stories. I remember finding a man on YouTube who actually he calls himself a former emotional abuser. Hasn't uploaded in a few years, unfortunately. I hope he's okay. But he had a series of videos explaining how he used to abuse his ex-wife, and he doesn't do things like that anymore. Unfortunately, their marriage could not be saved because it was just too bad. But I have a lot of respect for people who do things like that, especially because it takes a lot to understand what you're doing is wrong. I've engaged in abuse by, oh, there goes my lighting. I've engaged in abuse not understanding that it was abuse, because until you're outside of it, you don't understand that your behaviors are not normal. You were not treated normally.
Yep.
So you think this is just how you treat people. One good example that I can give of me being pretty horrible, the other person involved in this was also toxic, but I have to take responsibility for my half. I was in a poly relationship situation and had a girlfriend. When she came into my life, I treated her slightly better than I got treated, not understanding that that was being abusive, because I was already in a situation that was pretty abusive. So I was like, oh, I'm treating her a little bit better than I get treated, so I'm not abusing. And it's like, and she was very toxic back to, it was a freaking toxic situation, thankfully. I think she probably still hates me. I hope she's okay. I hope she's doing okay. I don't really know what happened with her life after that, but I hope it's a lot better. Because in hindsight, I figure out I care about these people. Didn't think it at the time, because you just get kind of mad thinking you see only their toxic stuff that they're throwing at you. You don't see your own for a while. And that was kind of where I was just mad at her and didn't think I cared that much, because I was like, no, she did all this stuff. You're like a child about it. You're very childish about it. But, in hindsight, it's like, no, I actually did really care about that person, so I hope her life is really good now. And I don't think we'll probably ever be able to be friends or anything again, but I certainly, if she tried to reach out or something, I would definitely want to know, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? I'm sorry for everything that I put you through on my part. I would want her to know that she's important, that she's not forgotten, because I don't want her to feel like how I made her feel when we were in the relationship. I want her to know that, no, you need to realize that you were awesome and I was wrong.
Yeah, and that's interesting. A couple of things. One of the things I've noticed is that it's very difficult to be in a relationship when you've grown up in abuse, right? Because you don't have any model, right? There's not some, and you also internalize a lot of those negative patterns, right? Like you don't even notice it. It just sort of becomes part of your, the texture of your mind. It's how you operate. And unless you do some deep self work, it's kind of hard to interrupt that. And the other thing I noticed that's interesting is people that grew up in abuse tend to attract toxic people and get into relationships with them. And that's something that I always try to caution people is like, if you're going to get into a long-term relationship, make sure, and you have, an abuse history, make sure you sort that out before you go down that road, because you will invite people in that are just like people that abused you. It is almost like gravity. I've seen it so many times.
I agree with you 100%, actually. Um, One of the notes I had here was about how if once you survive abuse and come out on the other side, especially narcissistic abuse, which I think is the type, even if the people weren't all full-blown NPD, I think that's the general type I dealt with through my whole life. You will lose most of your friends. And it's usually, it's hard to not be mad. Even I have moments where I still get mad, but I have to step back and remind myself, okay, from their perspective, they don't understand. They're not in the situation. They don't understand that your toxic behavior at the time was from surviving the situation and trying to recover, or generally being in the situation. From their perspective, they don't understand that you've changed. Like maybe they decided, oh, whoa, I need to step back from this person. They're too unhealthy. And then they just slowly maybe ghosted or faded out of your life, and they never really gave it more of a chance. I actually lost my best friend recently. I'm not mad at her. I love her. I hope she's doing great in life. It sucks. I do feel betrayed, but I also understand, yeah, I was doing some very unhealthy things, especially at the end of our friendship, where I was, I was not really able to recover how people should recover from a situation for a number of factors that I won't really get too deep into, but we'll just say I had to still be around the person, even though I wanted to leave for a very long time. So to her, from her perspective, she's seeing all this toxic behavior. She's not understanding that I have amnesia. People didn't even understand that I had autoimmune diseases at the time, which that's a whole different story. But I do believe those are related to abuse as well.
Oh man,
So
I got to
yeah,
talk about that.
from everybody else's perspective, it's like, yeah, it's hard to not be mad, but you need to understand that if somebody was your friend and you genuinely care about them, it doesn't make it not real from you. What you felt for your friends was real, so try not to let the anger overwhelm that. Just remember that was your friend. That was somebody you really loved. So just let it go and hope they have a good life, and maybe sometime in the future they'll get nosy. They'll get nosy, they'll look you up on social media to see if you're doing okay. That's still a small sign of just caring. It's, maybe you won't be best friends again, maybe you won't be in each other's lives again, but at least don't leave it negative, I guess. Don't leave it negative. Don't walk away super mad and blaming the other person for everything. Instead, just try to see their perspective, because to them it's, the toxic behavior and recovery process probably looked terrifying.
Yeah, I completely agree there. Um, and I've had to do that with people in my life before as well. So I completely get it. And this has been a struggle for me, knowing when to cut people out and move on. And you wish them well, but like, I'm sorry, like we can't really be in each other's lives anymore. Um, I think there, particularly when there's substance abuse involved, that there's the codependence thing. Are you familiar with that at all?
Codependency, yes. Unfortunately, I'm a very codependent person myself, and it's still something I'm hard to break free from.
Yeah, I interviewed Dr. Robert Glover, who is kind of like a specialist. He's a family counselor. He's been on Chris Williamson a bunch of times. He does a lot of work on codependency, but it's he frames it it's from a male context, and he calls it being a nice guy, right? And like
Oh, yeah.
that was my very first introduction to the topic, and I saw that in myself, and I was like, oh my god! Now I'm currently going through that, trying to work through the issues of boundaries, right? Keeping in my lane, not doing too much for other people. And it's weird because I've seen so many people that have these issues that came out of abusive households. It's another thing that's just it's so prevalent.
Yeah, no boundaries. I actually didn't have boundaries until a few years ago either. I think most of mine came because I was sexually abused. I think
Uh,
that taught me no boundaries. So I didn't really know any better. And then getting into like different toxic relationships and stuff where people still don't, they don't put their own, and they don't encourage you to have your own boundaries. So it ends up to
yeah.
where you just never develop those. And I had a lot of trouble with that until the past like decade or so, when I kind of started being able to somewhat develop some boundaries. I think anything like that, it just teaches kids the the way of the world that is taught to kids from abusive people is usually like, if you displease me, I am going to hurt you. I'm going to ruin your
Mhm.
life. I'm going to make sure you're isolated. And I'm going to make sure that nothing good ever happens to you again. And you're scared because you're dependent on those parents or grandparents or whoever it is at the time. So it teaches a horrible lesson. It is not the right lesson to teach kids. You want to teach kids to change something or do something different because they want to, out of respect, out of love, out of, all these good things, instead of teaching them, if you displease me, bad things will happen to you. And that's what abusive people always teach us, is if you displease me, I'm going to do bad things to you.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And that's where I think you and I are kind of aligned, being libertarian-ish, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what you are. Like
Anarchist.
I consider myself an anarchist too, right? Like I'm a basic, non-aggression principle absolutist. You don't hurt people, you don't take their stuff, you don't defraud them, basic stuff. And it's funny that in America we still don't even have any issue spanking kids. Like we have like 83% of kids are, hit, and like nobody seems to care, and that's just like what I would consider light abuse. Like there are families that spank their kids, but it doesn't, that might be like the only thing that they've got, right? They don't have alcoholism and narcissistic personality disorder or bipolar or borderline or any there's none of that other stuff, but even that's abusive, right? And as Americans, we're just we kind of collectively shrug at that,
Yeah.
and expect all these kids to turn out okay. And I struggle with that.
Yep. Me and my husband actually disagree on this a lot, because he's a lot older than me. He's 13 years older than me. So he's in his 50s, and he's like, "Well, no, when they misbehave, they need to be spanked, just open palm spank." And I'm like, "Well, that's the least damaging version." But I completely disagree, because all being spanked taught me was instead of not doing the bad things because I understand that they're bad, it taught me don't do this bad thing because people will hurt you. And that's not how you
Yep.
teach a lesson. It made me not, I think it set me up for not being able to take accountability as I got older, or not healthy accountability, because you know you don't want to get spanked when you're a kid, so of course you exaggerate, you pin it on your brother or sister or something, and you don't even understand that that behavior is unhealthy. We do butt heads a little bit on that, but I think he's kind of sees my point that when it's overboard and it's not for like a severe thing, I could see maybe if a kid ran out into traffic or something, I might bust their butt for that, open palm bust their butt. But other than that, I'm like, no. I just don't believe spanking helps. I believe it only teaches if you do something wrong, you'll get hurt, instead of if you do something wrong, this is why you don't do this wrong thing, and
Yeah,
making them understand why.
I don't even think it's always do something wrong, right? Like I think the message that gets conveyed is if I make this person angry, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've seen kids spank for just for annoying their parents, right? Like they're not necessarily doing anything horribly wrong. It's the might makes right thing, and you sort of develop this internal mental model where it's like that frames your world. Like it is all about violence and coercion, as opposed to negotiation, actually sitting down and having a discussion with your kids. Like they don't build those skills they need if every time they just know they're going to get whacked, right? That doesn't do anything for them.
Yeah, it actually takes away early life lessons in critical thinking and introspection from us. When
Yep.
we would have those, if we're actually punished in a more healthy way, if we're disciplined in a more healthy way, we would have time for reflection, time for introspection, and time to understand, oh, this person reacted this way because of this. Even if and you'd be allowed, if you're having healthy parents, to understand maybe I didn't do anything wrong, they're just upset, instead of anything I do is going to make me get hurt. And that's kind of what we kind of enforce, that kind of teaching. It doesn't work. It sets kids up for just not being able to have critical thinking or introspection.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I don't know how to address this because it feels like even in libertarian circles, like I get into arguments all the time. They're like, "No, I got to spank my kid. You're abusing your kid if you don't hit your kid." And I'm like, "Wow!" Like if they're the closest thing to a group that is supposed to understand the non-aggression principle and basic human ethics, like God, what about everybody else? Like it's kind of a depressing thing, honestly, when I engage in those discussions.
Yeah, it's similar for me. I can somewhat understand their perspective of just that they feel like if they don't discipline their kids are not going to learn lessons. But I don't understand where they have the thinking of, if I don't spank my kid, like that has to be the punishment. I get in arguments all the time for it too, just because to me that's just it's too much to just spank for everything.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think we're gonna get anywhere with it. It's just one of those things, like, circumcision is another one. Like, there's certain issues that I'm just like, and I'm talking to the Tin Men, George from the Tin Men tomorrow, about this particular topic and a bunch of others. But uh, man, it's very depressing, and it's just the state of mental health should waken everyone up to be like, hey, there's a real problem. Things aren't getting better. Things are actually getting worse. And I'm trying to make the world a better place and try to make people reflect more, and engage in conversations where people might consider this from a different perspective. But it feels like there's not a ton of appetite for it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not in the right places on the internet. But it's kind of discouraging sometimes.
There does seem to be just a lot of people in the, I guess, healing space of different parts of the internet who I think they all mostly mean well. At least most of them, I would think, do, but they sometimes approach it in a way that their conversation, it sounds so bleak and so hopeless and stuff, that I just feel like, okay, you guys are maybe have a little bit of that, but then maybe bring it back to the more hopeful stuff. I do see that a lot, where it ends up where the intention is good, the idea is even good, but then it ends up just such a bleak topic, bleak article, bleak podcast, without that hopefulness of healing. And we both know that people can start to heal.
Yeah, yeah, they definitely can. I believe people can. And that's why I want to have these conversations. Like, I want to know like how we can help people, help ourselves, get better, because like trying to recover from this stuff is really rough, and it's never a straight line. It feels like it is, sometimes two steps forward, one step back, maybe vice versa. What have you learned? What when you're looking at like how we can help everyone, sort of move past this stuff and get to a more healthy place? Like, what have you learned in your journey?
I've learned that it's often the most unconventional things that actually end up helping you. I have a few weird things that ended up helping me a lot more than I expected them to. And this was when I still had my issue where I was like, "Oh, don't trust therapists." I actually put notes on them. So one of the first things that kind of woke me up to help me understand that I had been brainwashed and conditioned in my childhood to think that abusive things were normal was actually a music album. And I know that sounds, a lot of people will say music saved my life and stuff. It's not one of those, but the album itself, it's an interesting album. The concept behind the album was actually the Heaven's Gate cult. And if you know anything
Oh,
about cults, you know that
yep,
narcissists abuse the same way as cult leaders do.
yep.
So the album was called The Demonstration, and it is by a band who's actually a modern band called Drab Majesty. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're
I
not
have
super
not.
well known. I would highly recommend them. It's kind of an 80s new wave sounding band. I listened to it and I liked the sound, but then I started looking into what it was about, started looking up the definitions of certain words because I don't know if I told you this, but I have a 7th grade education. I wasn't really allowed to be very educated. So,
What?
yeah.
What do you mean you weren't allowed to be educated? Tell me more.
Um, so, if you know anything about public schools, especially in the United States, they will often, like, nobody understood that I had AS. They didn't understand I had Asperger's. They just think I'm a bad kid. They didn't understand I was being abused. Just think, oh, you're a bad kid. And this happened for quite a few years in my life, but especially in teenage years. The school system really failed me. It kept it to where I believe in the state of Tennessee. Actually, that was where my high school time was in Tennessee. Their requirement, I believe, is people who are 7 to 17 years old are required to be in school by law.
Hmm.
Well, I was about 14 or 15 when they expelled me and just put me on GED classes and stuff. And it was for a very dumb reason. Like, I won't completely fault them because I guess they had to take it seriously at the time. But my sister made a hit list that had Barbie and Ken and JFK and a bunch of things that were obviously satirical on it. That's what we got expelled for. Instead
Oh,
of
wow.
doing anything else, they uh, decided to put me in the crazy person class, which is fine because you have the juvenile delinquent class, the crazy people class, and then you had like the special needs mentally challenged class. We weren't allowed to be next to the mentally challenged people, I guess, but they put us and the juvenile delinquents together. So they took it very seriously and put me in that. What it really was me having bad behavior from having a really crappy home life. When they put you in that, so I was in 7th grade when they finally put me into that. They give you this worksheets that are what they would give to people in 2nd grade, so it doesn't teach you anything.
Hmm.
I just stopped doing them. I was just like, whatever. And then they would, I don't know, almost react like an abusive parent where they're like, why aren't you being successful in our program? And it's like, you're giving me 2nd grader work. It's boring. So they kept me in that for many years after the 7th grade thing. Finally kicked me out of school when I was 14 or 15 and just put me in GED classes. And they just told me, you don't actually have to come to these either. So I just quit going to those because they weren't going to really help me get my GED and I couldn't afford it anyway. I was a child. So I do not have a GED. I have a 7th grade education. And instead of following Tennessee state law at the time, they decide, nope, you just go to GED classes. You don't even have to finish these. I'm pretty sure the law was 7 to 17 at the time, which would have been in the late 90s. So what they did to me was also illegal, I'm sure.
Wow. So, did you ever go on to get your GED?
Nope. I have no education at all.
Oh, wow. How's that impacted you?
I couldn't have a job if I wanted to, I don't think. A lot of places, even just cashier work and stuff, when you fill out the application, most of the time they will not call you back if you don't have at least high school of some sort.
That is
So
wild.
I do my gimmick, very obviously satirical OnlyFans. I don't make a lot of money, but at least I'm not having to do anything I'm super uncomfortable with. It does piss people off when I have to tell them and reply to them, no, I don't do any of the super dirty stuff, sorry. Because I know most people subscribe to that because I think it's funny.
Got it, got it. It is aren't you doing that to try to save up for a surgery due to
Yes.
autoimmune condition? I think I remember something about that.
Yes, so there is a link. If you happen to want to look up the article on this, it's by a woman named Isabella Wentz, I believe. She has Hashimoto's. She figured out that there is a connection between people who have Hashimoto's and people who have breast implants. A lot of people with breast implants end up with
Mm,
Hashimoto's. I actually didn't get sick until I had these for about 15 years. And I do think that they're probably behind what is causing it. It's kind of like flipping a coin though, right? If you get them removed, possibly it won't do anything, but possibly your antibodies will drop to zero and you'll be a normal person again. So I'm not really sure. I've been watching a few people who've had them removed for similar reasons, and I'm waiting on one more to have hers removed just so I can kind of see how does it affect her. That way I'll have about 4 people that I've seen success or not success on it.
got
And
it.
then I will probably end up getting mine. I think when you get it done, they just take out the implants and then they kind of have to reposition your tissues so that you look normal again up there. Hey, it's going to be hard for me to do because I have to admit, breast implants do look pretty good when they're done right, but I have to learn to part with that if it's affecting my health, and I think that's going to be difficult for me just because one of the things that childhood trauma and stuff taught me was it teaches you to care about your appearance too much. It's a certain type. I think sexual abuse especially does that. It teaches you to care more about your appearance than you should.
Interesting. I that's not hasn't been my experience. I don't know if you know, I was raped at 8 years old. Like I sexual abuse in my past as well. I didn't really have that. But I, I don't doubt that that's true. What was your experience with that? Like why do you think that that connection is there?
Okay, so I have seen it do two things. It either makes people feel like they need to be too perfect, like they end up, here's a nerd moment, they end up like Fulgrim from Warhammer 40K where they have to be absolutely perfect, or they end up to where they gain a bunch of weight or dress really dumpy or try to look as unappealing to other people as they
Yep.
can because it's a defense mechanism. They don't want these people to come and touch them inappropriately or do things to them. I've seen that a lot with friends of mine that have just had some kind of horrible sexual abuse happen to them. In my case, I don't know why I am so obsessed with trying to not age. It's ridiculous, and I wish I wasn't. I know people probably think, "Oh no, it's fine to be that way." I don't think it is. I think it's very negative, and it doesn't impact you super positively. You can only slow down aging so much; it will catch up with you eventually. Um, I'm not sure exactly what the connection is, but I do have a couple of ideas of what could be the cause of it. Some being you'll have little boys and little girls who have an abuser who gives them gifts after they do bad things to them, and I think that kind of lets them think, oh, if I keep looking like this and I stay okay and I let these people do this, that I'll be okay. And they think this probably for the rest of their life subconsciously. They're thinking, I have to keep everything up and I'll just be okay if I do that. I think that's what it teaches to them. And then for the people who dress down, I think maybe they had an abuser that while they still abuse them, probably verbally abuse them and emotionally abuse them at the same time, telling them you're fat, you're ugly, or you're worthless, or some other horrible insult that you should not be telling to people, in any situation. But it makes it especially worse when it's a predator doing something to somebody and also on top of it abusing them in a different way. I think it made them have that defense mechanism of, yeah, if I don't look appealing and I look bad, people won't hurt me worse, or people won't do weirder things to me. It might just make them feel a little more safe because they feel like that's what it taught them was, yep, if I'm ugly, it's not going to matter.
Mm, interesting. Are you familiar with Dr. Vincent Fellidi's work with Kaiser?
I don't think so.
Yeah, so this is super interesting. Kaiser Permanente is both a health insurance company and a medical provider, right? So they provide the care and they provide the insurance, and they care a lot about keeping costs down, right? For that reason. And so Dr. Vincent Felitti was put in charge of an obesity clinic, and
Hmm.
his job is like, hey, these people that have obesity, obviously type 2 diabetes and heart disease and cancer risk, all these things, negative health outcomes, these people are costing us a ton of money. Go figure out how to, solve obesity essentially. And he went there and he dealt with these people and he would get tons of success. They would drop a bunch of weight and then like clockwork, people would be dropping out of the program. And when he started probing these people, like, why are you not doing this? He found out these people started disclosing, these morbidly obese people were disclosing childhood sexual trauma. And he just discovered that link. And that from that link sprung the ACEs study. Familiar with ACEs?
I think that's the one that I have actually read about, where he figured out that people who have all kinds of problems have been abused, and it's been linked to autoimmune, chronic illness, obesity, and
Yes.
all that stuff. I did read about that one.
Yeah, that's an adverse childhood experiences study, ACEs. And there's actually a questionnaire you can take. I think there's like 10 questions that ask you about adverse childhood experiences. And then they've tracked over time negative health outcomes associated with the number of ACEs that you have. And it is scary. When I did mine, I'm like, oh boy, like I'm
I remember taking it too. It was not
it's
good.
pretty. But anyway, that was Dr. Vincent Fleety's work. But that part makes sense. The people that want to make themselves look unattractive to, keep people away from them, to be unappealing, whatever, that makes sense. The inverse I never really considered before. So that's an interesting take.
Yeah, I knew, should I say my current best friend, still best friend that I have, he had a girlfriend who her brother did horrible things to her and then would buy her a gift, and she was kind of similar. It's unfortunate because she did commit suicide eventually,
Sorry to hear that.
but hearing that story, as horrible as it was, that actually helped me make that connection and kind of see that behavior in other people who were treated similarly.
Oh boy. So you also have PTSD, correct?
Yeah, I would say I probably more likely have complex PTSD, but since it's not an official diagnosis, I guess I'm only allowed to count the stuff from physical and sexual trauma.
What's complex PTSD? I haven't heard that term before.
Complex PTSD, I'm not sure who coined the term, but it's what they believe a lot of people who've been specifically through narcissistic covert abuse or borderline abuse, that's what they tell them. So complex PTSD is constant stress over a long period of time that causes the PTSD. Whereas PTSD typically is a violent or sexual horrible experience that happens like in a short time. It happens very intense. So that's really the only difference.
Got it. Got it. So the symptomology is pretty much the same. It's just like the
Very
cause is
similar.
different.
Very similar. Yeah, I believe people with complex PTSD have something called emotional flashbacks. I have them too. It can be something where you don't even understand what it is at first. For me, it was a weird realization where you will, maybe you'll smell something, or maybe there's no trigger at all, and you'll suddenly just have one of those horrible feelings that you used to feel when bad things were happening to you. And it suddenly just kills your mood, and it just makes you in this fight or flight state, or just super nervous or something. And they call those emotional flashbacks. Instead of just all visual, it's like a feeling. And I know they say that there's not really have to be triggers to them, but I have noticed for me there are triggers. I just didn't understand that they were triggers at first, and it can be something like seeing the people who used to treat me abusively, having even a certain food that's a food that I was eating around that time, playing video games that I played at the time when bad things were happening to me also do. And then as I brought up when we were talking before about, things that could trigger people, the DuckTales theme song.
Right.
I remember bad things happening to me and hearing that in the background. So unfortunately, it's something I could probably never watch again in my life. I would love to get over that trigger because I remember liking that cartoon as a kid. It'd be nice, but it's just one of those weird things.
So have you paid attention to the stuff that they're working on with like MDMA assisted psychotherapy and psilocybin assisted psychotherapy for PTSD?
Yes, I think it's a great idea. You can actually get mild psychedelics like amanita mushrooms. I take those kind of often. I take the little tablet capsules that are sugar-free
Mhm.
because I can't really do gummies. It really messes my system up to put carbs in it. I think it's fantastic. I actually had more realizations on those shrooms than I had from helping myself or from therapists helping me out.
Oh boy. Now you're
What
speaking my language.
Yeah, one of those things, which I don't share this very often with people, but I feel like this is important because I have seen other people have this similar type of reaction. I do not ever answer to my birth name because abusive people gave it to me. I actually want to legally change it. I just haven't been able to do that yet. Where was I going with this? Yeah, the Amanita shrooms. I took way too many at one point where it was just a little bit too much, a little bit too intense. But during that whole trip, I played some video games, I saw some cool visuals, but at some point I got up just to go use the restroom and then, brush my hair out of my face and comb it really quick and was standing there looking in the mirror and just thought, you know what? I will always hate it. I will always never acknowledge it as my name, but it's not that big of a deal because I can just ignore people who use it. And it was a realization that I get like violently ill feelings when people call me it. So it's not like it's a small reaction. I feel very sick when it happens. So that was a good realization. It actually helped me to grow, I believe. I think
That's interesting.
all of those are going to be good things for people with PTSD.
Yeah, yeah, I do. Particularly MDMA. That seems to be the one that MAPS. You familiar with the MAPS organization?
Somewhat.
Yeah, Rick Doblin. He's the, or actually, I think he just stepped down as a chair, but he's been lobbying the government to approve MDMA assisted psychotherapy. That's been their big push. But it's a multidisciplinary something for psychedelic sciences. I can't remember what the acronym stands
Yeah,
for.
I'm only kind of familiar with it.
But yeah, they're leading the charge on this stuff, and they've been having tons of good success with particular military folks that have got PTSD. They've done a bunch of trials on it, and it's really promising. And then I think psilocybin is another one that's underrated.
Yes.
I've had similar experiences as you, and I describe it the same way. I've never done amanitas. I've heard that's an unpleasant thing, but maybe I'm wrong. But psilocybin mushrooms, it's like psychotherapy in a box. Like you go in for 6 hours and it just gets inside your brain, sticks stuff in your face, and shows you these like realizations that like give these aha moments, right? Where you don't need to even do any introspection. It's just shoved right in your face, and you see a lot of these patterns and the reasons why you are the way you are, and ways that you can kind of work yourself out of these things. It's a really beneficial compound. I think it's really a shame that it's legal.
Yeah, I think psychedelics are going to be the way as we move forward. The more we find out about them, it seems like so many of them: DMT, MDMA, ketamine. I think they are using psilocybin as well, but just all of those seem to have a lot of good progress in people. And then people who are just getting them while they're still illegal and doing them for their own trauma have had leaps and bounds of recovery that they wouldn't have had without using them before. Again, this is where I was talking about earlier, where I had weird things, uncommon things that really helped me. One of the other things that is supposed to help you develop DMT is Wim Hof breathing. I do that almost every night. It takes 11 minutes. That
Hmm.
helped me out a lot. I've also heard sleep hypnosis and sleep meditation supposedly can help kind of open that up as well. I do that nightly, but I'm not sure if there's any actual literature behind the DMT part of it.
Are we talking about like
Uh,
triggering an endogenous DMT release? Is that what you're targeting?
yeah, yeah.
Got it.
I'm not sure if there's like actual scientific proof, but that's allegedly what Wim Hof breathing does. Is helps you small amounts of DMT.
Yeah, yeah, and that's tough because it's impossible to measure, right? Like that's one of those things that it's really a hypothesis at this stage, but if it helps, it helps. Like I'm a really scientifically minded person, evidence-based person, but also of the mindset that if it helps, it helps. I don't care.
I agree with you on that. Another thing I do that possibly has something related to DMT is if you know that crazy Liver King guy who needs to just chill out before he dies. He
I
actually
do.
has a very good supplement company. So he's crazy, but his supplements are fantastic. They're desiccated organs. They
Mhm.
have a brain supplement that is brain and liver, but it also keeps the pineal gland in the brain when they grind it up. So I take those 2 or 3 times a week. Just kind of, if there is anything in there, it could be beneficial, is how I feel about it. Even if there's not, the organs are beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't think like any residual DMT wouldn't make it through because it gets broken down by your gut, right? That's why with
That's what I'm thinking.
yeah, ayahuasca, they that's what's basically just DMT plus a monoamine oxidase inhibitor to stop it from breaking down in your gut. So unless you took an MAOI, I don't think it would probably help. But like I said, it's probably not going to hurt.
Yep.
Um, that reminds me, like you're carnivore too, right?
Yes.
Wow, man, my audience is gonna love you because I've got a ton of friends that are in that community. I don't consider myself carnivore, but I did do the carnivore January thing, like for World Carnivore Month, and I've been mostly carnivore. I would say 95% this year, and I've lost like 60 pounds already. So I'm carnivore adjacent at least. And so, how long have you done that?
For Carnivore, it's only been about 2 years, and for keto, I did keto before that. Me and my husband have been keto to carnivore in over the span of about 10 years. So there's a lot of interesting things that come from that. One thing that people can't really tell anymore with me is that a lot of people cannot tell that I have autism. They cannot tell that I have Asperger's because I seem very normal. I have trouble with eye contact even with cameras, but I think I do a lot better. And that didn't happen naturally. That happened when I went on a high-fat diet and then slowly ended up on carnivore. It actually got much better on carnivore than keto, where I have almost no symptoms of autism now. I'm almost a normal functioning person.
Really? That is astounding. And so
Yeah.
what were your symptoms prior other than the difficulty with eye contact? Like what symptoms plagued you that you resolved with carnivore?
Some of the worst autism symptoms for me in hindsight, I couldn't tell you at the time. I was unaware of this going on. The lack of self-awareness. I'm sure you've worked with people with autism and you understand that most of us do have a lack of self-awareness. It's not that we're bad people or that we're like anything less than human. We're just kind of weird. We kind of don't have a lot of self-awareness and we're kind of quirky.
Yeah,
I
I work in
Yeah,
tech, by the way. I work at a big tech company. Like, there's so much autism everywhere, and so yeah, I love and appreciate all my people that got the tism. They're great. The most software developers, security engineers, they're on the spectrum somewhere. I think it's
I think they are.
in that field, it's like a superpower. Like there is some real benefits to it, honestly.
Oh, I agree. I've seen a lot of people do really, really well with tech who have some kind of autism spectrum disorder. Even if they're just kind of barely on it, they still do way better than people who aren't, I think.
Yep, 100%. And so, what does your diet look like now? Are you basically just beef, salt, water, or you do some other, eggs, or like what's your diet look like?
My diet is mostly just meat and eggs, and I do chicken and pork too, but it's mostly beef. Sometimes sauces and seasoning, but I don't do those every day just because I can react to them. I mostly have water. I mean, even when I want something that's like a soda, I have Lucrezia, so I don't really
Me
put a
too.
lot of weird stuff in my system. So I have a lot of eggs. I eat cheese maybe twice a week. I react bad to cheese, so I try to kind of avoid it. Maybe have it 2 times a week, three if I'm feeling crazy. And then once a month, I do cheat on carnivore with donuts usually.
You
But
said cheese with donuts?
no, no, I said I cheat with donuts. So I cheat
Oh,
on my diet with donuts
I was like,
once
man,
a
I
month.
love cheese, but on donuts that didn't sound very appetizing. So I'm glad you
That
clarified.
would be a weird donut. So that's the one carnivore thing I don't do is once a month I have one cheat day and I usually just eat a bunch of donuts, and then if I feel like there's some kind of food that I haven't had in a while, like a pizza or something, I'll have a pizza as well and then just go right back to carnivore. For some people that's hard. They can't just jump off the wagon and then jump back on, so I understand why a lot of people don't do that. For me, I can't cheat more frequently than that, but I can jump right back on when I'm done with my garbage food. So it doesn't really do anything too bad to me. Kind of flares up my psoriasis a little bit more for a couple weeks before it goes back away, but it kind of keeps me excited to have my 12 cheat meals a year. Other than that, I stay pretty strict, though. I try to even limit dairy, artificial sweeteners. I sometimes have Element, if you've seen those electrolytes that are
Yep, yep.
flavored. Sometimes have those. Even then, I try to limit that with the flavored kind because of the stevia in it. So it's pretty much meat and eggs for like 90% of it, meat and eggs. Then occasionally I'll get wild and throw a little bit of cheese on top of something. I'd say maybe even it's like 98% because I don't do a lot of cheese.
Interesting. So you got psoriasis, which is an autoimmune condition,
Yep.
and you think you have Hashimoto's. Have you seen any improvement in the Hashimoto's symptoms from carnivore?
Yes. I actually used to, before I even knew I had Hashimoto's, and I used to do anime conventions and cosplay and things like that.
Mhm.
I would get ready, which would completely exhaust me, but people just thought I was lazy or something. So I would get ready, get to the convention, and just sit in one spot and walk around on occasion. I think everybody thought I was lazy or disinterested, but the thing was, I was so exhausted by that point. My brain couldn't even function to understand what to do or how to communicate with people beyond normal anime nerd stuff. It was bad. And I actually had a friend, no longer another person, no longer my friend, but I had a friend who sometimes when I had to stand in line, he would have to hold me up because my spine and stuff would start hurting. They thought I had premature arthritis, but I actually wonder if I had rheumatoid arthritis since it
Mm,
all went away once I got on a low carb diet.
right.
So that's something else I probably have. I seem to have all the bad things. And you know what they say, when you have one autoimmune disease, you have at least three.
Really? I didn't know that.
Most
I'm
people
I'm
have 3 to 5.
I'm interested in this because I've got 2 of my 3 daughters have got what they believe to be some autoimmune thing. Like, my middle kid has got arthritis of the jaw, like, the X-ray came back and they're like, "Look like you're in your late 60s," you know?
That's
And
yeah, that sounds like how my spine was when they x-rayed it. They had obvious signs of arthritis when I was like 19. It was kind of crazy.
yeah, it's interesting the link I'm hearing about autoimmune stuff and childhood trauma, abuse, that sort of thing. So, do you know a whole lot about that?
Yes, I have met several people who have maybe not just Hashimoto's. I know some people with lupus and other things as well, but let's just say the autoimmune spectrum of stuff. I have at least 5 people I somewhat interact with, just chit-chatting here and there. And most of them have revealed that they did have either a super stressful childhood that was kind of like the edge of abuse, it just wasn't healthy, maybe
Mhm.
not full blown abuse, or they had a very, very bad childhood with very bad things that happened to them, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional and mental abuse, all of it going on. And I know that they've done studies now too where they think that narcissistic abuse does cause autoimmune disease or eventually leads to it.
Really?
There's 2 articles that you
Narcissistic
can
in
find.
particular?
Hmm?
Narcissistic in particular?
That's just what the article covered. I'm sure severe emotional abuse could probably do it too. I think physical too, because if you're being physically abused, you're being mentally abused as well. There's no
For sure.
disconnecting that.
For sure. It was very
Yeah.
interesting because I went to the rheumatologist and there's a questionnaire. And one of the questions, or there maybe was several questions, had to do with home life, right? You recently experienced any, divorce or any sort of stress, or like they went the whole list of family type of stuff. And that's the first thing that keyed me in that there might be some
Yeah.
relation.
Yeah, I really think there is a lot more to it. And I think it doesn't matter the type of abuse either. I know that there are some unhealthy mental health spaces where people argue over if physical or narcissistic type abuse is worse, or should I say covert type versus overt type of abuse, which one is worse. I don't believe that we should compare the two at all because sure, here's the only thing that I think is a difference. I could be wrong. I have a 7th grade education and autism. I don't know. So the thing that's the only difference to me between these two types of abuse, because I believe people get severely damaged in both of them. The person who is being physically hit, they understand that they're being abused, but they still have the same reaction. They just have the understanding. The person who is being covertly abused and brainwashed, they don't even understand that they're being abused, but they're still having the same reactions. To me, that is the only difference.
Got it. Yeah, that actually might even be worse with the covert stuff because if you're not even aware, like you said, you're pretty damn well aware if you're getting punched in the face, getting choked out or whatever. Like I'm being abused, but the sneaky stuff, um, and particularly if there's gaslighting involved, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to understand what reality is and even understand that no, this is really not cool. What's happening to me?
I think it's similar with people who get sexually abused too, is most of the time, if it's not a actual violent rape, when you're a child, you don't comprehend what this thing is happening to you. You're being manipulated, you're being coerced, you're being
Mhm.
conditioned to think that this is a game or that this is something that if you do it, they won't hurt you or your family. Like you have no idea for years what's being done to you. I think that has it's a similar type to the covert abuse where you're being so manipulated that even though you're physically being touched and penetrated and all kinds of other things, unless it's like the super violent, like the Hollywood version of it, the glamorized version of it, you don't
Right,
really
right.
understand what's happening to you. Same thing with human trafficking. Speaking of stuff Hollywood ruins, is it makes
Yeah.
you think that human trafficking is like Taken. I had no idea that some of the things that happened to me were human trafficking, like the guy I wasn't allowed to break up with and had to stay in a relationship with and sleep with so my mom could go clubbing with him. Didn't understand that was actually fit the definition of human trafficking. Because Hollywood makes you think the movie Taken is human trafficking. So they make you think it's this dramatized over the top version where you get physically blackbagged and kidnapped and dragged off to a sex auction, and it's like, no, that's usually not how this happens.
Right, right.
It seems like you've been coerced into something and you can't escape the situation, by any means. Human trafficking.
What do you hope for the future?
I would actually like to get either health coaching certification or life coaching certification so that I can help other people and have letters after my name so that they would be more inclined to actually talk with me more. I know I can do those things without it. I just feel like it helps. I think I'd be better at health coaching just because I've helped myself so much with nutrition to get
Right,
a
right.
lot better.
Cool. Well, hey, we're a little bit over time. I really, really thank you for joining me, and I know that was not a comfortable conversation in parts, probably for both of us. But I think it's important, and I think it's a really good thing that people see these conversations happen and know that it's okay to talk about, and hear from people that have had these experiences. Because there's, like I said, there's so much shame. And there's so much people don't want to talk about this stuff, and maybe don't even know that they've been abused in some sense, right? And I think just having these conversations is a really good thing, and I don't necessarily enjoy doing them, but I think it's important. And so I think we share that in common. I think we both are aiming for the same thing. And just kudos to you for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Yep, anytime.